One woodworker's trash might be another woodworker's treasure. That's the point of Jenny and Davis's Box of Scrap Challenge, where they mailed us their offcuts and we had to turn them into something cool. So I built a new and improved passive speaker amplifier. Want to see how? Go Gadget Woodworking. The first step in any challenge like this is understanding the wood you have to work with and seeing the possibilities within it. And that takes time. Once I decided to make a speaker box, I picked semi-uniform boards and started experimenting with layouts. If I was smart and wanted to make things easier, I could have used a router template to trim them to the same size and shape and save some sanding time later. Instead, I decided to save as much of the original shapes that Jenny and Davis sent me as possible. So I put the tallest boards in the middle and the smaller on the ends, which, if you squinted real hard, began to resemble a nice, smooth, semi-uniform curve. I labeled the tops of the boards 1 through 8 so I wouldn't forget which goes where, because I'm pushing 40, have twins, and I'm going through a major home renovation. It's hard to remember to eat, let alone what order these boards go in. I glued together boards 2 and 3, 4 and 5, and 6 and 7 into blanks. This will let me cut all the shapes I need before the final glue up. When the 3 blanks dried, I drew a bell-shaped opening on the 2 and 3 blank. This is going to be the resonating cavity, and in my research for the last speaker I made, it's a great overall shape for this kind of passive amplification. You can read a bit more about the science of acoustic impedance in the article that I wrote for Popular Science, which I'll link to in the description. While you're clicking on links, consider clicking on that like and subscribe button below if you enjoy this kind of content. I cut the bell out on the bandsaw. I used much too rough of a blade for this, but I didn't know where my finer blades wound up when I packed up my shop for the renovation. Using what I could find as a theme throughout this project. I could have driven up to my makerspace and solved this, and all my other I can't find that tool problems on this project, but it was late, and I didn't feel like it. I sanded and filed the hideous tooth marks out as best as I could, and then traced the shape onto the 6 and 7 blank, and cut that out the same way. Two fairly identical resonating cavities. Next, I needed to make a channel to hold the phone in the 4 and 5 blank. Because the bandsaw was so rough, I cut this out with my pull saw and a chisel, which was perfectly fine. Finally, I used a Forstner bit, which I did dig out of storage, to drill a hole through the middle of this blank to allow the sound to move between the 2 resonating chambers. I think this was a 7/8 bit, but I could be wrong. I traced the shape of one of the bells onto the blank so that I'd know about where the hole needed to land. Second glue up time. I used a scrap of plywood and my tabletop to keep the back and the bottom as square and flat as I could. When the entire assembly was dry, I used my chisels to hog out the rest of the channel to hold the phone. I'd thought about using a router, but I didn't want to dig my bits out of storage, and I wasn't sure how I could get it to sit flat on such an uneven surface anyway, though I did need to figure that out for a later step in the project. Chisels took a bit longer, and I got some unfortunate tear out because I suck at chiseling, but it worked. Then I marked where my phone speaker landed in the channel, which I had to pretend to do because I use my phone to film, and for whatever reason, they haven't figured out how to make a phone camera that can film itself. Amazing awareness of camera placement right there, by the way. I swear, not blocking the shots with your hands is the hardest part of making woodworking videos. There you go, past me. That's better. I drilled a couple of half-inch diameter holes down into the resonating chamber and chiseled up the space in between to allow the sound from my phone to actually reach the speaker system. Kind of an audio spelunking adventure. Functionally, this is all that a speaker box needs. But woodworking is only half about function. A project like this needs to look cool as well. Remember how I decided not to route all the blocks to the same size? Well, now it's time to pay the piper with a random orbital sander, some 60 grit sandpaper, and a lot of patience. I tried using a block plane to help a bit. I couldn't locate my card scrapers. But really, the sander did most of the work. A belt or disc sander would have been easier, but I don't have one of those, and it was still late, and I still didn't feel like driving all the way up to my makerspace. I tried to keep as much of the natural contours of the boards as possible, and then rounded everything over, progressing up through 220 grit. Once the body was shaped, I started shaping the legs. These were made from the cutting board offcuts in an effort to use more types of scraps, despite my earlier fear that these would break.
Problem with using these, I've tried to use these in the past, is they snap so easily.
Spoiler alert, they did. I found one offcut that had two boards that were longer than the others to function as feet and trimmed that down to width. I spent some time sanding a bit of an arch between the 2 feet and then brought it over to the table saw to split it in half. I worried about the pressure of the saw vibrating the glue joints loose, so I made the cut in 2 passes to reduce the strain on the seams. The legs survived. While I had the table saw set up, I decided to use even more of the scraps by cutting a maple inlay into the box. Normally this isn't hard, but I had the challenge of cutting the groove over a curved surface, which didn't feel super safe or accurate on the table saw. After some thinking, I taped 2 flat boards to either end of the box, giving me a flat base to glide along the table. For added security, I squeezed them together with a clamp. I was worried about the pressure of the blade overpowering the hold of the tape. Then I cut the inlay in the top, raising the blade a bit at a time until, like Bruce Willis in Armageddon, I hit my depth. Then I moved the fence over to widen the channel until it fit the maple scrap I'd picked out. Once the top groove was cut, I removed the tape boards, cut the same groove in each of the sides, which were flat, so they didn't need any referencing help. With the grooves cut and lined up, I trimmed the maple board down and glued it into place. More stellar camera work. I used my flush cut saw to remove the excess, badly scarring one face with the teeth because I was too lazy to put the blue tape down to protect the project. Sanded it all down, smooth, including the scarring, and filled the gaps with a little glue and sawdust. Not the prettiest, but hardly noticeable for little hairline cracks like this. While the inlays were drying, I decided to do just one more thing to the legs and sand the arch a little bit taller. Just one more thing is always a dangerous attitude when woodworking.
No! God damn it! The legs broke. I knew that was gonna happen. I f***ing knew it.
Imagine how weak a joint has to be that taping it snaps it. This is exactly why I don't use my offcuts from cutting boards.
I knew that was gonna f***ing happen.
But honestly, it turned out fine. I sanded a taller arch like I originally wanted anyway, and then glued the broken piece back on using the same blue tape that snapped it in the first place. Then I glued the legs onto the bottom of the speaker box, where the glue would hold it in place even if that seam was a little weak. I used the scrap of plywood from earlier as a clamping block to get even pressure across all 4 feet. Clean up the glue lines, sand it a bit more, water pop it, and then sand it some more. Then it's ready for finish. For this, I used wipe-on polyurethane, which is one of my favorites. It's fast and easy to apply, and the finish comes out nearly perfectly smooth from the start. I just rubbed it down with a brown paper bag before the second coat, and voila! A perfect finish for a perfect speaker. I was very happy with my previous speaker box, but I am shocked at how much better this one is. I think it's got a few things going for it. First is the improved bell shape. It really looks like a horn on the inside, which is going to maximize the effectiveness of the sound wave interactions. Second is the dual resonating chambers, which again just gives more area for the acoustic impedance to do whatever it is that makes the music sound better, which I don't fully understand still.